Heather, welcome. Good afternoon over there.
Good
Uh,
afternoon, Nagui.
I'm glad you could join us. It's been amazing getting to know you and some of the things that you've been doing. There's been, I meet a lot of people and a lot of coaches from around the world and so forth, and occasionally I meet somebody like you that really stands out because of what you've done. A lot of it, I'm thinking maybe 99% of the population never reaches that point of understanding behaviors, but you've created a whole science, I think, almost around what you do. So I'm pleased you could join us. I'm looking forward to us talking about your journey and what you've done and how the behavior comes into it. So without further ado, Heather, give us a little bit of your background and how you developed this amazing talent that you have.
Well, thank you very much for hosting me today, Nagui. I've enjoyed getting to know you as well. Um, I am, a transitional career coach, and how I got to that is that I've spent 30 years in the recruitment and executive search sector. And through that journey, I've worked extensively with competency frameworks and sitting on the insider side of the recruitment process with the decision makers, evaluating candidates and how they perform in recruitment processes and how they articulate their skills, their experience, their competencies for specific roles. And I developed the knack of being able to read between the lines, to understand how those individuals are being evaluated, and to feed back in such a way that is constructive and helps them improve for the future. And from there, I moved on to helping individuals and coaching them when they had all the skills and the competencies, but they couldn't articulate it. So it was getting into that process of starting to coach people and recognizing how competencies and behaviors helped us identify future talent and also help people who are ambitious think about the behaviors they needed to demonstrate and develop that for the future. And so now I really do specialize in board appointments, because while I have dealt with recruitment from kind of grassroots all the way through, there is a major change in how people perform when they're transitioning from being the deputy or the number two or the director of whatever that reports into the main executive on the board and being the person that the buck stops with. And so helping and coaching people to prepare for that transition is my niche and where I sit in. And also, really ties in a lot to your behavioural intelligence areas and that your expertise, Maggie.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of why we connected, isn't it? It's just that, and it's an area that I haven't really come across too many people that are able to operate in that area and space of, preparing people for the board. And I guess that's something that's evolved from what you were doing, is what you're saying. How do you see that happening with, say, executives? Is it usually executives that are exiting the workforce or have exited the workforce and are looking to get an engagement like that? What's the typical journey that they jump into?
Well, you've got to remember there's two sides to the board. The board is both the non-executive directors that were there for the challenge and the governance, but you've also got the executive directors who sit on that main board and are the officers that do the work.
Right.
So I work on both sides of the board. So it's both appointing the executives who that's a very different transition from being, their number two, the person that does the doing, and transitioning from the doing to owning the strategy and the direction of travel is very different. But at the same time, you've got that transition from doing the doing, if you're an executive or you own the transition, onto the non-executive side or a trustee side, where they are there in an advisory and compliance perspective. And normally people have an ambition to do that. And there are two phases of people's career that they do it. There's those ones that you've mentioned, the ones who are retiring and want to keep their hands in.
Okay.
Or you've got people who aspire to be an executive, the chief finance officer or the chief operating officer. But the requirements for those roles are to have experience at board level. So they will often go over and do a voluntary non-executive director role in a smaller charity or smaller organisation that's relevant to their field to gain, so that they can use their board level experience to promote their own career. So there's two sides when you go into that sort of role.
So that's interesting because, I hadn't really put that together. And I've been out of the corporate world for a very long time. But to recognize that for someone to shift from senior management, VP, to a C level, they need that experience. That's quite a revelation for me. So is that often critical?
So when you're looking at C-suite, there's a number of routes onto C-suite. So there's the internal candidate, and if you are blessed to have a really supportive C-suite person as your line manager who is supporting your transition, who is normally either looking for progression themselves or a retirement, if you're in a position where you've got someone sponsoring you, giving you the opportunity to contribute and act at that level, that is brilliant. And you do see some people who've transitioned beautifully from being the support act to the main player, and that's really interesting. Otherwise, you normally transition by going into a smaller organization with a larger role.
Right.
But if you want that opportunity to try and retain the size and complexity of your organization, that's where you can look externally for some board experience. Because not every organization gives the non-C-suite people opportunities to deliver these big strategic long-term projects, because from a behavioural perspective, it's really different. When you are in these sub-board roles, as in not the executive, when you interview at that level, you're looking for people who can spin 20 plates, own all of the transactions, manage the size and scale of the teams, and they are running this year's work. What are we achieving this quarter, this year? And then you have the C-suite ones who are holding the space for their teams to deliver what they've asked them to deliver that year, but they're holding the big picture. They've got the 3, the 5, the 10-year plans, and they're making sure you're going to there. So from a behavioural perspective, transitioning from thinking about this week, this quarter, to thinking about the 5-year plan and showing that you can hold it steady, that's a big difference.
Yeah. And in the transition ones where someone is being groomed, if you like, for that role, if they don't have someone to champion them, if you like, do you help them find that champion, or how does that work when you're coaching someone who has the aspiration but really is struggling to break through that ceiling?
So there's different routes for that, and it all depends on the sector. So I do a lot of work in government, public sector, not for profit, and the industries that are very regulated and support that. And the beauty of that is in certain of those sectors, you have kind of well-known regional names and programs where they will specifically support future talent, and they'll match them up with a mentor that's preparing them.
Okay.
In other sectors, it's a very competitive marketplace. So there is no way that anybody from a like-minded organisation is going to mentor somebody through a process. So it really does depend on the environment that they're in. For me, what I can help them with is to know what behaviours they need to be demonstrating when they go through to the next level. And it's difficult, so we're going to talk behaviours, but it's that thing of dress, dress for the role you want, that old adage. But this is about behaving for the role that you want and protecting your strategic thinking time. So you are thinking strategically. C-suite executives and board members are discussing decisions from a unitary perspective. So the people, the operations, the finance, the overall CEO, they are all making decisions together with all of their professional hats merging for the greater good. Whereas often, before you get to that role, you're examining things with your professional hat on. So you're looking at things from the the perspective of the leader of people, or from an ops perspective, or technical or digital perspective. So learning to look and work across the different professional platforms and areas of operation, and to look longer term, but also to look outside of your organization. These are all things that you can learn. They're skills that you can learn, and you have to protect the time. And so, learn to delegate and learn to communicate better. So, I will be talking to people about, the best chief finance officer that they've seen and worked with, and what would you like to emulate? And some of these behaviours, it's like learning, and you all know more about this than I do, but it's like breaking a habit, isn't it? You can learn to behave in that way, and taking the time and self-reflection to understand yourself and how you operate and the level that you behave at, to try and identify areas that you want to tweak and change yourself, so you can tell a different story in the future. And when we're spotting talent, which is, I've spent 30 years trying to find the future talent, it's the people who are behaving with the same sort of strategic clarity, communicating clearly, delegating, bringing others with them, all those behaviours that really phenomenal leaders exhibit, but they're demonstrating those attributes.
So it's it's not just wanting the role, it's not just thinking I'm good for the role. What you're really talking about is their observable behaviors. And I like how you've defined some of those. How do they communicate? How do they delegate? What tasks are they prioritizing? These are all behaviors. So, very close to my heart. Thank you.
And it's interesting because you and I were talking about behaviors, and often there's things that come in clusters. And, one of the things that I was interested in your model, which I don't know if I fully understand yet, is the fact that if you've got a few peaks in your performance, it might predict something else that they're not. So they might be aware of some of the ways they operate, but they might not realize how all of those traits come together to impact how their overall performance is. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, often unpacking their story that is their blind spot, right? So the points on the map of Acumatch allow us to ask questions to help them interpret what's going on. But it's, as you said, the combination sometimes is what creates the story that they then get the aha moment from, right? And they're the ones who need to get the aha moment. We can't just give them a magic pill, right? So it just causes us to have questions, to cause them to be curious about things that they haven't thought about, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you can have the best thought in the world, but nobody can read your mind. They only observe your behavior. And so that's why we talk about leadership intelligence from behavior intelligence foundation, right? Yeah. And so the journey sounds interesting, and it's funny, if I had met you maybe 15, 20 years ago, I may have been one of your candidates interested to do that. But these days, we're on the other side of the fence, and we often have an advisory board that I reach out to and talk to sometimes from time to time, depending on what we want to do. What's the difference? An advisory board versus a functioning board? Can you call it a functioning board? But I think of that board, the CEO or the president is sitting at that table, and the president who's running the company, or CEO who's running the company, is hired by the board effectively, right?
So it's a really interesting dynamic, and different boards do work differently. But essentially, that sort of the non-executive director, chairman, or president, they have the role of challenge, but they also have the role of internal friend.
Okay.
And one of the things that's really interesting when we're recruiting is this issue of challenge, in that if you are the chair of the audit committee, you will be challenging the chief finance officer on the way they're running the finances, and you might be challenging the technical and operational teams on their controls and the way that they're doing things. But challenge isn't supposed to be confrontational. Challenge is healthy, and when you're at this level, it's having that second pair of eyes that thinks of the things that you might have missed. And different boards work in different ways, but the ones that I really admire are where you have open dialogue, and nothing's off the table. Your professional advisors who are there to support and help you to meet your strategic ambitions are there to challenge and help you. And when it's lonely at the top, isn't it? So when you're at the top of the tree, you're at the top of the organization, you're driving your organization forward. If you ever second guess yourself, they're brilliant to go to talk about that. But also there's that formal check and challenge. And I think that's one of the things that you really see people blossoming into realization when they step in to like a trustee type role while they are still an executive, is that it's not criticism. Challenge isn't personal, challenges to help you improve. And often with our advisory boards, you're trying to bring in skills that you don't necessarily have. So the most popular of the advisory roles that are popping up at the moment is AI. People who are wanting to bring in people who understand generative AI that can help them use the benefits without seeming like they're non-humans, running. So 5 years ago, everyone wanted equality, diversity, and inclusion specialists. Now there's a lot of generative AI. There will be another theme, but it's often when you don't have expertise in-house, trying to bring that in. And of course, that's very specific to sectors where you're working in. But it's really interesting. But you're saying you're not one of my candidates, but actually you're probably one of my target candidates, Nagui, because you have all of this expertise that you could take in as an advisor to other organisations. At our phase of life, a lot of people are targeting that portfolio career where they might do a couple of consultancy roles, they might have a couple of trustee or non-exec director roles, but it's that a couple of things that means that they can retire from their full-time executive career, but actually feel mentally alert and valuable and valued, and some pin money.
Interesting. Thank you. And, I'm thinking, I know a couple of people who are sitting in those situations. In fact, one of them comes to mind. I don't know if this is a good conversation for us today, but the board is dysfunctional, and he was brought in as a fractional CEO to help re-engage the board in the right way and provide some new direction for the company. And then there was another one that also pops into my head, and that is where the board of directors was also the operational executive team. And that was pretty dysfunctional as well. So do you help with that, or is it just the journey to get somebody on the board? Do you get involved after they're on the board to help them with things like that? Or is it outside of that?
So I have a few people that I work with. I have some associates who are particularly good at that, particularly good at going in to a board that need to develop their team working skills.
Okay.
So I've personally done it at department levels. So where you've got a department that aren't quite gelling, I've gone in and done that. But I would support some of, I would consider myself to be a junior partner to some of my associates where we work on that.
Okay.
So, I've done senior leadership team development exercises, normally where the organisation's going through change, and that's it's bringing in areas of new skills and behaviours that they haven't previously had to develop. So I have done a number of those exercises. And I have to say it's fascinating. It's normally when organisations are merging and they have to start working with organisations, working across organisational boundaries to bring in a unified form, but actually they've normally competed, and there's normally some interesting behaviours, let's say, that come up in that tense situation. So I would support that, but I have some fabulous colleagues who are great at board dynamics. I do think that when you're looking at a board that needs to learn to play nicely together, those very, very experienced individuals who have have been there, done it, and got the t-shirt, who have run large complex boards and changed the dynamic and changed the cultures of all organizations. I would not line myself up to say I can do that.
Okay.
I've got to be honest. And partly because I can work alongside them, and then I sit there in awe learning from them.
Yeah, and I remember you saying that one time that you get to be an observer sometimes on those. So if a board is looking for someone, do they reach to you? How do you get engaged with that? Do you also get requests like that, or is it usually the other way around? Somebody wants to advance their career, or get back into something after they've retired or exited.
So most of my career, I have sat in an executive search firm where the requests come in and we go and find the talent. And then I gradually found that the part of the role that I love doing is helping the candidates prepare to do well in that setting.
Right.
And then somewhere along the journey, I started having chief executives that I'm working with ask me to coach and mentor members of their teams who are having specific issues. And that came about because I'd coached them through recruitment processes and helped them, demonstrate and change the way they were performing. So now in I Answer Birds, what we do is we prepare people for transition. So I no longer work on the jobs, I work on the people.
Right.
So when somebody has an aspiration to move into the next level, that's where I start working with them. And I have, a program that's called the Leadership Career Accelerator. And it's a combination of one-to-one coaching on individual issues that looks at things like the conditions that individual needs for success, because we all thrive and reach flow in different environments. And then the practical skills of how do you demonstrate your readiness for this next level of work. There are skills you can learn about writing an application and performing at interview, but actually understanding yourself and what conditions and environment are supportive for you to deliver your best work. And that's my sweet spot. It's what I love doing. It's a combination between career coaching and life coaching and mentoring. But we have built a program that means we'll teach people the skills that they can learn, support them to understand themselves, and give them some, time and space to plan their career. Because I think, sustaining leadership requires creating a space to pause and adapt. And I think that's what you've done for many years, isn't it?
Yeah, the gap, the understanding, the blind spot keeps coming back to that behavior, and the science of unpacking it and being able to develop new skills, but also the element of predicting behavior. And I think you do some great work in that space of also, just because of your ability to read people, I think. Talk to me a little bit about that. Yeah.
So I think the predictor, so competency-based interviewing, which a lot of people talk about or used to talk about, don't necessarily know it, but the best indicator of future performance is past performance.
Right.
So when we're interviewing, we're asking for, where, when, why, what, give me an example of.
Yeah.
And the reason we're doing that isn't to kind of go, have you done this job before? but it's how did you behave? How did you, how did you corral different people in a complex setting to deliver the impossible? And so from a recruitment perspective, if you're handling a specific role and we know what the challenges that particular organisation are facing, and we know what their cultural preferences are and their values and how they operate, predicting someone's success in that role is to look at what's the same. Where have they handled a challenge in the way that it would be appropriate to that organisation? So that's how we predict it. And that sounds easy, but actually there's a real deep understanding of what good behaviour looks like. And
and a lot of people that I've come across use that technique. They're missing that whole predicting outside of what you've done in the past, and just labeling somebody as this is all you can do because that's all you've done in the past.
Yeah. But the best competency frameworks have a continuum of behaviour, and like communication is really one of these best things. So good communication, when you're just responsible for you and or your team, is clarity and clear and able to write well and those things. Good communication, if you are a CEO responsible, public facing, reputational risk, setting direction, is totally different to what their communication skills are. And it's where people get stuck, because they kind of go, well, I got a tick on my personal development review that I'm a good communicator when I was a manager, and then they just think that they're a good communicator. So what we're looking for is the descriptors of behaviour of that real top tier communicator, or that real top tier of managing performance or driving transformation. There are descriptors that are talking about, externally managing long term. So when you interview somebody and they are telling you about things that are the behaviour and descriptors that are wider organisation, strategic and non-thinking, but actually they're using those behaviours to manage a department. And that's the predictive element. You can see that they have moved up to the next level of behaviours, even though they haven't necessarily got the size and scale of the examples. And that's something that not many recruiters know how to do. And actually, where I started to get very interested in working with people with your profession is where we'd used psychometric testing and then had a proper behavioural psychologist come in and do a validation interview. And they were the ones that I started to really learn from about not just why they behave like that, but did they understand it? Would they change it? Had they developed it further? And I think the fact that I had that opportunity to work with people with the behavioural intelligence background raised my level up as a recruiter. And it's why I'm quite interested in the whole kind of, do people understand themselves?
It's interesting you bring that up, if you don't mind me interrupting again. It just it reminds me of when we were developing AccuMatch and Behavior Intelligence. I actually started, I don't know if I told you this, had a staffing firm, and we were doing recruiting for hundreds of clients that we had in the coaching firm. And what ended up transpiring was we had AccuMatch as an assessment, but we also had a written form freehand response to similar questions that are to do with behavior. And by taking both and then analyzing the psychology and the patterns that show up here that aren't showing up here, or vice versa, and looking for potential gaps between the two, is what then led the interview strategy to unpack those things and really get to the bottom of, were you trying to guess over here, or you're trying to tell me what I want to hear over here? What was going on? And we found that was so hard to teach recruiters. And so it's funny that you say some of the same things, that you needed to bring that in to have that conversation.
But I used to find it really valuable, and partly because, people used to tell me I was a walking human psychometric test, because for some reason I got to the level where I didn't find it particularly difficult to predict whether the line manager and the potential appointee were going to actually have a match. But actually working with a behavioural intelligence specialist, the two of us together would have such a richness of evidence that would support a decision from a board. And you and I have had the discussion that some of the tools available are really quite basic and put you in a box and pretend that nothing can change. Whereas actually I like the ones that tell you where you are now, and you can use them to kind of work out where you want to work on your personal development and where you'd like to move to, and how would you measure that transition. But I think that when you're dealing with really senior, important posts, it's important that the candidate understands themselves and what their criteria for success are, and the reassurance that the decision makers get. If you're a president appointing a CEO, having layers of assurance that this is somebody that can deliver the outcomes that you want, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
But
sorry.
What I'd be interested in terms of your model is, while I've not personally going into dysfunctional boards where they're having some little transitional issues, is how useful it would be if you could actually get some of your tools in to try and help them understand each other's perspectives and look at where they could meet. And I don't know if you've actually used AccuMatch in that setting.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of coaches are using it specifically for that, because the dynamics of teams are often fraught with lots of judgments that are based on observable behavior without understanding the thinking style that's going on to, what's the phrase? Most people have a good intention, but they use the best tools available to them, and those tools are behavioral tools, which are often the wrong tools. And so teaching them how to recognize those differences and so on. In fact, we're doing something at the moment where we're deliberately asking people to do their AccuMatch, because people can't predict what AccuMatch is mapping because it's brand new. We threw away everything that was done previously and started from scratch, so that we would have something that people can't guess what you're looking for. And we ask it in so many different ways. But what we're asking him to do is, you're going to answer it in your role right now, but I also want you to do this additional assessment that is asking you about the role that you want to move into and what you think you need to be like in that role. in order to identify blind spots that they think they know what they should be doing, but they don't, right? You know that, right? So it's interesting, and I think my next question is really around how we're using AI. But are you seeing AI starting to play a role in what you're doing as well?
So AI has been playing a part for many years in just general recruitment, because of course most people apply through some form of applicant tracking system, and that applicant tracking system has, you know, gradually moved away from a person viewing the CVs to an AI assistant looking for keywords and matching that up. So it's been around for decades, actually. You know, I was slightly offended about 20 years ago when it was suggested that the computer could, you know, match people to a role more effectively than I can. But actually, I think AI takes away a lot of the legwork and actually lets you focus on where humans can add value. But I'm regularly talking to people about just the simplest of things of their resumes, their CVs. And this, like, do you use AI or do you not use AI? And the answer to that, I think, is to use AI well, because actually, if you just do a standard laziness of, you know, help me write a CV, you get a very generic, non-personalized thing that you don't recognize as yourself.
Right.
And, you know, I meet so many people who have disappeared out of their own CV, their resume. You just don't recognize them in it.
Yeah.
But actually, you can use it to really enhance and quickly understand an organization, its challenges, and interview you to put that in. So I think that AI is out there, but I mean, there's just different types of AI, isn't there? So I think the stuff that means that we don't have to do administrative, repetitive tasks, brilliant, bring it on. I think that, you know, I've written AI prompts with my coaching language that I give to people to do so they can understand themselves. And I basically, you know, work with your AI assistant to go through these prompts. And I think in terms of, I've only got so much diary time to interview people. So I think in those instances, using an AI prompt to get the questions that Heather would ask you to get to these points, I think that's really valid. Right. Because people who can't afford coaching, because it is an investment, and who want to start to experience what it's like to have someone helping you with self-reflection, I think is really useful. Do I think AI is actually ready? You know, people are using all the different tools as their life coach at the moment. I worry about that a little bit, because all of the models do tend to tell you that you're fabulous and wonderful. I wonder how much holding the mirror up there is. Yeah, but you know, there is also a place where not everyone can access, you know, a coach to help them understand their behaviours, but actually Acumatch in itself, but personality profiling tools, behavioural intelligence tools are a form of AI. They're a form of generative AI. You know, it's data intelligence that are coming up with predictive realities. So I think, you know, I think use it wisely, use it carefully, and use it well.
You know, we can probably talk about that particular topic for another hour. But I'm looking at the clock and I'm going, okay, you know, I'd like to actually maybe book us another follow-up if you're okay to do that, because we are seeing a lot of questions around how companies should be, could be, shouldn't be, where all those boundaries are, and we could probably talk about that for a whole hour.
We could probably do another 45 minutes on that, and I always enjoy talking to you, Nagui.
Yeah. Well, Heather, it's been amazing, and as usual, your wealth of knowledge. And I echo the, you're a walking psychometric. I believe that. I've seen you at work. It's amazing. So congratulations. And if anyone needs to reach out to Heather, what's the best way to reach you?
So anyone is welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Heather Iamson, and I am the founder of Iamson Burns. Equally, I will, iamsonburns.com is quite easy to find as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so
much. All right.
much.
Well, you have a great rest of your evening and day, and you and I will just, we'll catch up and talk about this other conversation. I think it's fascinating, and a lot of people will want to hear about that. So
that's fine.
Thank you.
You too, Nagui. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Oops.